We all set? Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Board of Finance Public Executive Session on the 2013 budget. Because this is an executive session, we will not have public comment on this budget this evening. We will just discuss as a board what we've heard throughout the public deliberations on the budget. Tomorrow night, we will be taking the votes on the town side budget, the Board of Education budget, as well as raises for the registrar of voters. This evening's meeting is added for us to be able to discuss amongst ourselves in a public setting what we may or may not do tomorrow evening. With that, welcome to the meeting. I'm going to ask Mr. Hiller to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. First thing, since we met last week, the proposed budget before us has been adjusted through a vote of the Board of Selectmen. I'd like to thank the administration, Mrs. Gardner, for forwarding to this board the cuts that were made. And I'd like to ask Mr. Tetro, the first selectman, could come on up and just, if he's got any comments on what the Board of Selectmen did the other night, or perhaps if we have any questions for him. Would you mind coming up? Thanks. I didn't give you any advance warning, so this isn't a... So I'll turn it over to you. Mr. Tetro, do you have anything you'd like to say about what was done the other night?
I think, simply, we look back, we did add an additional $1 million in terms of supplemental payment to the workers' comp or internal service fund.
Yep.
To help adjust part of the deficit there. We did go through and try and balance that out with a few other cuts, and forgive me, I don't have the adjustments in front of me to specify those. I don't think we made I'm going to say two types of adjustments to the budget. We made a series of administrative changes based on some of the things that had come out of our discussion. I'm going to pick out workers' attendee bonus as one of those. You'll see a number of small changes kind of ripple throughout the budget on that.
Yeah.
We did make some larger adjustments to help balance out that increase to the Board of Ed number, to the supplemental payment to surplus, and to the legal fees.
Okay. I'd asked, do we have an analysis handy for the internal, or rather not the internal service fund, but the general fund?
Let me get to the right page here. The current internal service fund has an unassigned balance of $13,414,000.
Right.
Obviously, the benchmark that we get quoted against as far as a percentage of operating budget, the figure for last year was 5.19% on that.
So where are we going
Addition.
to be at the end of this current fiscal year, Paul?
We are currently, right now, we had been projecting, and this is obviously a moving target. We had previously, in internal discussions, had estimated a surplus of in the $675,000 range. We think as the result of recent tax collections and continued savings in vacancy areas that number is probably ratcheting up at this time.
Okay, so what is our percentage going to be at the end of this fiscal year versus
I
the budget?
would think on the unassigned basis, and the caveat on this is always that barring unforeseen
Yeah, it's a best estimate.
best effort would be in the $1.5 million range.
Okay, but what is the
which brings it up to 15 million.
So we're going to over-deliver by $1.5 million?
I'm sorry?
You're going to over-deliver, you're going to add $1.5 million to the surplus
I
this
think if
fiscal
we
year?
can, if we can continue on the trend that we're on now, due to the efforts we're making in the tax effort and the continued vacancies in various departments, that potential exists.
So what would be the percentage of the overall budget that fund balance would be? Then,
5.7.
5.7. Okay, and then if we were to Mr. Tetra's point, we were to add 750.
If we were to add 750,000 on the new budget,
Yeah, so what would we be next year?
and that's assuming that everything, and obviously your assumption is that everything else is flat.
Yep.
Let me- 5.77.
So it would be close, 5.77, so 5.7, 5.8. So in other words, if we were to add the 750,000, we would be marginally improving our position.
Well, you have to realize, obviously, because one
Well,
of
the
the things
budget's
that
growing.
happens there is that you're taking a base number of 262, let's say, in the current year, or 263, and upping that to the 273 number that you're looking at.
Right.
So you're going off a bigger base. And this is one of the issues that you continually look at, that the budget increases, the surplus, to stay at the same percentage, you have to have some increase.
Yep. Any other questions on that one item? Because that was a change.
And just to be clear, Paul, that's assuming that at the end of next year, we're right on budget, right?
Everything else is
Right.
absolutely
Okay.
right on budget. In other words, that you've only generated $750,000. Obviously, as we know, that there's going to be some variance, positive and negative, throughout.
And then, Mr. Tetra, you're adding $2 million supplemental now to the internal service fund. And we received some additional information last week regarding medical costs and projected medical costs going forward. Did you guys run a scenario as to where the internal service fund balance will be next year at the end of the year, given another supplemental $100 million, or another supplemental $1 million addition to that fund?
Yeah, I'll defer to Mr. Hiller with a simple analysis, basically saying that the analysis that we looked at Tuesday
Yep.
night was projected through June 2013.
Yep.
So we, in essence, added $1 million to that, so it should be $1 million less negative than what we looked there.
And that
It
was
would be-
all in, that analysis was completed, because last time we looked at it, I think the Board of Ed number had not been adjusted, or one of the numbers had not been adjusted. Last
I'm
week,
gonna-
right? One of them was, and one of them wasn't last week when we looked at it.
All right, I'm going to check with Mr. Mayor here. See.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor.
Gentlemen, it's a pleasure to be here.
Bob had
And
worked
ladies.
on, yes, most of the iterations of that during the week, so I'm going to defer to him on the number.
Yeah,
The only number that was not included in the schedule that was discussed at that meeting you're referencing is 148,000, or 158, I don't remember exactly, $1,000. So if you add a minus 158, i.e. increase the negative fund balance
yep,
by 158, you will get to the number prior to the additive of the million.
yep.
Or if you want to just do it one step, obviously 942,000.
Paul, do you,
I think we have that,
Even, exactly. I
Yeah.
did this myself.
Mr.
Paul,
Chair,
do you
we
have that
we
number?
have those worksheets, so if we can't hand those out, we can certainly email them to you first thing in the morning.
That'd be great.
Paul,
Thank you,
can-
Mr. Hiller. do
Paul,
have
can you
that?
get a note to email those out? Because I know we had those prepared for Monday.
If I remember correctly, thank you, Mr. Mayor. If I remember correctly, we had the supplemental that we put in, or that you put in the original budget, after we've got the new medical, did really not improve our position.
Well, it improved it to where we thought we would be before the new news.
Right.
So it
the
kept
additional-
it kept us equal.
It kept us equal. So the new million, the supplemental million, didn't quite improve the balance by $1 million. It improved it by 850 or less than that, actually. Okay, if we could get that, thank you, if we could get that analysis, just so that because one of the things, obviously, this board has been preoccupied with over the last several years has been the reserve balances in internal service fund, the general fund, and then, of course, the pension plans, and then, of course, OPEB. So those are the four items that we've concerned ourselves with greatly over the last.
And that's why in this budget, there's, roughly 2.8 million in addition to the reserves, as well as the fully funded OPEB ARC.
Right.
So the net result in simple math is that the additional 842,000, net 842,
I don't think it's that high, though.
well, he said 158.
Yeah, but I think there was, I think some of the other, I think we were actually
Well,
decreasing the
let me
balance.
let me
Yeah.
rephrase it. The additional million less some number,
Right.
basically in round numbers, keeps us constant from
It's
last.
improving our position from last year, but not,
But not as much.
But
not as much as you would
but not as
like it
much,
to.
right.
Right.
Yeah, close to $1 million improvement, but not the full million.
Gotcha, okay.
Okay. Mr. Brown, did you have anything? Did anybody else on those items? Okay, any other questions on the items that the selectmen put forth? Seeing none, thank you, Mr. Tetra.
All right.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Hiller, and thank you, Mr. Mayor. At this point, one other item that was on our agenda was actually tomorrow evening, we need to vote on the salaries for the two registrars of voters. So, Mr. Hiller, can you provide us, again, with the objective here, if I'm correct? It's a 4-year salary for a 4-year term, correct?
I believe that is correct, yes.
It's a 4-year salary for a 4-year term, and it needs to be set before the term begins.
Right, and that current term does not commence until January 1st.
So what we are voting
Only
on,
really has a 50% impact on this year's budget.
okay,
I emailed the board earlier today. I do have copies, if you want, of the information.
please, Mr. Hiller.
And one of the issues was what happened last year when this board had to act upon the first selectman's salary, the two members of the Board of Selectmen, and the town clerk's salary.
Paul, do you have any more of these, or are you all done?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
We need 2 more if you have them.
Oh, did I? Wait a minute, I'm sorry. I must have.
Hoarding.
Hoarding, yes, I'm a hoarder. Thank you. Thank you for
Very
straightening that.
quickly, on the elected officials for last year, first selectman, the two selectmen, and the town clerk, we're treated basically the same. There was no increase from what was the listed salary at that time through the second year of the term. In other words, through November of 2013. And then there is a 3% raise in all cases commencing at the third year of their 4-year term. Excuse me. We also showed what had happened in recent history dating back to 2009 as to the registrar of voters' salaries, which are currently at the $32,225 level.
And these are for 2 part-time positions, correct?
That is correct. Other than, there are no no benefit costs attributable to these.
Please, Mr. Brockville.
Paul, do we have any comparative information as to part-time registrars in neighboring communities, how they're?
I believe the registrars did give that out when they
They
made
did.
their presentation for their budget. If not, I know, we'll have to get that. They're both at a RTM redistricting committee meeting this evening. I saw them both hour and a half ago or so. But I think it varies widely.
Let me ask you a little differently. How part-time is part-time? Do you
I'm
know how many
sorry?
hours a week they?
Well, I think the issue, we've always looked at it at this, you know, that they've set their own hours. This is what is varied dramatically from town to town. You will see some where it is a full-time position. You'll see some comparable-sized towns which, you know, there is frankly no consistency in this, on a comparative basis.
You have the information, Mr. Brockville? Yep.
Want to use the mic, Ken?
Any other questions, comments on this item? From any board members at this point? All right, so we do have, this will be one of the votes that we'll do tomorrow night. So we'll do the vote, and then we'll actually adjust their budget accordingly to cover the vote. And their budget will be adjusted for a 6-month period as this begins January 1st, correct? Okay. Moving right along. I'm going to open it up now directly to the board for any comments, questions, or concerns on the current year budget that's been before us. So feel free, the floor is open to any board member. Go to Mr. Brockville.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to try and dispense with what has been a contentious and interesting issue over the last few years, which is the town's investment account, which I've been lucky enough to work with Paul and then with Mr. Tetro on, as well as with Mr. Flynn. And we appreciate the openness and the communication we've had. I think the budget, I don't have the budget book to the right page, but I think the budget is $850,000 and then $100,000 for fees. So I'm going to I guess this is just a night to make comments and sort of telegraph what we're thinking. So it's at best an inexact science, as we all know, trying to figure this out. So my proposal tomorrow is going to be to cut that by 100 to 750 on the revenue line. And then I thought about this last night, I asked Paul, it doesn't have to be for tomorrow, but at some point I'd be interested in a breakdown of the 100,000 estimate, just to get an idea of what kind of fees we're paying to our different providers, but not for tomorrow, so that we can see where that is and continue conversations about that. But that's been a line that's been missing a lot, and not necessarily through anybody's fault. The interest rates in the economy are obviously dramatically lower than anything anybody remembers from years ago. So it's hard to generate a lot of interest return there. We made some very positive changes by removing some items in that investment account that we thought were, I'm going to use a word I don't want to use, risky. So I think 750, while it won't be right, by definition, it's probably reasonable.
Thank you, Mr. Brockville. Any other comments on that item? All right. Seeing none, other comments regarding the budget as a whole, or any? Mr. Brown?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just first a question on the pension. With the Board of Selectmen's discussions yesterday, was there any discussion on the actuarial recommendations, or was it just basically voted fairly quickly and we just took the recommendations?
There was no, I don't know if you want to, there was no specific discussion on it. Obviously, I think you've received, this board's received, well, first off, the presentation last Tuesday evening by our actuary, who subsequently met with the first selectman on Thursday morning, did present different scenarios which have been submitted to this board, as far as different discount rates, and furthermore, the impact of six different changes, what the individual impacts were on six different changes on the various assumptions that are embedded into the pension calculations. Obviously, there are some fairly dramatic changes in most cases, plus and minus. Obviously, there are some savings on it. I think that the two big drivers on that are obviously the inflation rate, using that at a lesser number, dropping that from 3 to 2.5%. One of the bigger drivers is the change in the valuation method, which in a sense has cost us more. And I think the one thing that this board should be aware of, and when Ms. Cherney addressed the pension board back in early February, it ties us much more closely to market performance. If it's good from a budgetary standpoint, it'll be very, very good. If it's bad, the reverse could potentially happen. Witness what could have happened in 2008 and 2009. The other two big changes, obviously, the discount rate, which is costing some money. One of the major changes is the assumption in the retirement age, which we're seeing nationwide in any employment group, that people are frankly working a lot longer than had been presumed.
Yeah, I think that basically, we accepted the actuary's recommendation with the simple way to say that.
Right, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Yes, Mr. Gaffney.
I just wanted to see if we could just clarify what the exact result of the Board of Selectmen meeting was from the other night regarding the Board of Ed budget. Was my understanding that a recommendation was made by the first selectman to reduce the budget, and then there was a further reduction recommended as well?
There was they did vote on reducing the Board of Education budget by $250,000.
Was that from the original 149 in the budget book, or was that on top of an adjusted amount?
Well, when you say the budget book, the town budget book as opposed to the Board of Ed budget book.
The first selectman had previously made an adjustment in his presented budget to the Board of Education budget.
And that's included in the Brown book as it was originally handed out, just to
That's
help.
correct. And then the additional 250 was off of that.
Okay,
So
that's what I
lowered
wanted
it.
to clarify.
Okay.
And
Okay.
Tom, just to chime in a bit.
Sure.
So Elaine might remember, I think the first selectman's adjustment was actually simply to reflect the pension.
All right, I didn't actually
Adjustment.
know if that was ever an official adjustment, so that was, okay.
Yeah, the process goes, we take the budget that's compiled, the budget as we reviewed it, included the first selectman's adjustments, and basically there was one adjustment. It was the adjustment for the pension number on the Board of Ed budget, because the Board of Ed budget book was prepared before the pension board reviewed the assumptions,
Correct. Right.
and before the actuary gave us the revised pension contribution number for that year.
Okay,
So the idea was to change that, but only change it for the pension number.
okay, thank you very much.
Great. Mr. Brockfield?
Sure. Finish that? I'm actually going to, if Mike wants to start, you don't have to, circle back a bit to a related subject and to Mr. Brown's subject on the pension. I think that there was a lot of questions, I know I had plenty, at the meeting about the assumptions and the changes that were made in good faith by the pension board. And I know I was uncomfortable with the rather dramatic drop in the ARC from last year to this year as a result of those changes. Excuse me. And I think, Tom, you calculated it was around a 35 or 40% change, right? And again, this is another area that's inexact at best, but I thought that the investment rate, personally, wasn't brought down enough to compensate. I thought that there was a much more aggressive effort on the liability side to change those numbers versus the investment side, which only came down a small amount. And it leaves me a little bit uncomfortable with making a payment, an ARC that's such a big reduction from last year. So in the absence of any exact science here, I'm going to probably tomorrow propose or ask for a discussion here at the table tonight, considering to increase the pension contribution. And I know there's several lines in the budget. There's a retirement line for the police and fire. There's for the town side. There's Board of Ed, and there's WPCA. But adding them all up, I think it's around $820,000. If we added that back into those 4 lines, we would do no harm, if that's the best way to phrase it, and we'd have a pension contribution that would equal last year's contribution. So that's something that I'm leaning towards, but I would love to hear my colleagues on that.
Is there any other comments on that?
I think it might be beneficial. What we did do today is an analysis, a quick analysis, and really we did it on a basis of for every $100,000. In other words, and so if you were to add $100,000 or $1 million or $2 million or whatever, it becomes a pretty easy multiplier. I think it might be beneficial to the board to look at the impact that would have on the budgets. Obviously, police and fire is totally contained within the town budget. The town employees' pension plan gets spread between 4 different budgets, one of which this board never frankly looks at, which is the school lunch program. And Board of Ed, Water Pollution Control, and the town. I think it's fairly self-explanatory as to what the impact, and it just becomes a multiplier in units of $100,000 for discussion purposes as to where.
You mean how it breaks out?
Well, in other words, if you said add 300,000 to the pension fund, what we'd have to do is split it
Oh, I see.
in this matter.
Yeah. I mean, I would definitely strongly advocate that we make an equal weighted contribution to all the different lines. I mean, they're all managed in the same fashion, and so I don't want to preference or punish, if that's the right word.
Well, and I think
any
that's what
line.
we-
So, yeah, so my inclination is, the reason I come up with 820, I think that adds up, if you just add the different line items back to last year. I believe.
This is simply the split that you would need to do
Of the
820.
Gotcha.
So of the
Yeah,
820.
and that 820 is broken out on page 292 of the budget book.
Right.
So you just need to do this
Multiply each of
split.
these by 8.2, give or take. Okay. Yeah, that'd be fine.
Thank you.
And
Mr.
and
Hunt.
we can calculate that specifically to $820,000 as to,
Right.
Thank you. Mr. Brown, you had said you wanted to say?
Without rehashing everything Mr. Brockfeld said, I'm in agreement with that for the same reasons, and I just, I hate to go in the wrong direction, but I think in this case, it's the prudent thing to do. So without just repeating what Mr. Brockfeld said, it's my sentiment too, if Mr. Brockfeld makes that motion to go along with it.
Anybody else want to comment on this item? Mr. Bolito?
Yeah, just simply, I agree with Mr. Brockfeld. The town took a 10-year holiday making any contributions at all to the pension fund, and that's kind of why we're in a position of playing catch-up. And while I do agree that things have changed a little bit with the actuarial changes that have been made, I think to be in a safer and more conservative position, we need to at least fund to last year's levels to make sure that we're on the right path going forward. Thank you.
Anybody else have a comment on this one? Okay, personally, I would support that motion as well for the very same reasons. First of all, I'd like to thank the Pension Board for their due diligence and for their actuarial report. I'd also like to thank the administration and Mrs. Tierney for putting together the additional analysis. I think, Mr. Brockfeld, you set it up well when you said essentially do no harm. And I think there's, quite frankly, too many moving pieces, and this is too important a fund, both to the town and to the town's pensioners, for me to be comfortable giving so much back on the liability side and expecting so much on the rate of return on the asset side. And as you earlier said, talking about the investment income, the only thing we do know is that it's not the right number, but it's the best estimates that we can put together. So in the feeling of do no harm, I have to agree that I would support that.
And I would just add that while this may be small comfort to the taxpayers who will see their taxes increase by some percent because of this action, that this isn't really spending. This is truly investing in the town's future. This money is going into this pension fund one way or another over time, and we're taking, I think, a responsible move by doing it sooner rather than later, when we're under, well, it's just, it's a slightly different thing than spending, is what I'd like to point out.
Right.
Yeah, much different than spending, actually.
Thank you, Mr. Polito. Mr. Polito, Mr. Brockfeld, and Mr. Polito, and Mr. Brown. Right. All right. Any other questions, comments, or concerns on any items? One item that I'd like to bring up, and I asked, and I didn't expect to have it tonight because I asked late in the day, but if you recall, in the budget book, there's a major budget drivers page. Can we turn to that page for a second? It's not numbered, actually. It's in the very front of the book. It's like the third or fourth page in. It's actually a schedule that I helped create at some point last year. But I'd like to ask that this schedule, if it hasn't already, I asked late in the day, can it be updated for the Board of Selectmen actions? Great. Could we get a copy of that then? Thank you. Thank you. I keep on hitting that darn thing. By the way, I should note that Mr. DeWitt and Mr. Kiley send their regrets. Each of them had different commitments that arose unexpectedly. So they send their regrets and have indicated that they will catch up with us subsequent to this meeting. So if you look at the new schedule provided for us, or to us, I hope, did we have copies for the public as well? It shows a 3.78 spending increase year over year on the budget that's basically before us. And if you look at those spending increases, you can tick off how many of these are quote-unquote untouchable, right? If you look, there's salary and wages, workers' comp, unemployment comp, health insurance, the pension liability, which we already talked about. There's the need for the supplemental risk insurance, which is also insurance, and which is in a negative fund balance position. And there's the surplus, which we already indicated. Paul, I think you indicated that we're 18 out of 18.
Actually, I did, no, we're 17 out of 18.
Okay, we're 17 out of 18.
I did this afternoon get the Greenwich numbers, and
Okay,
Greenwich is number 18, I'm pleased to
Okay.
say.
so our fund balance is very low as compared to the requirements of a AAA town. They want us somewhere near 10%, that's right, Mr. Tetro?
Based on discussions, 10% is the average for the AAA towns in Connecticut.
Right.
The rating agencies are certainly comfortable with that. They don't specify, they're not saying, you've got to be above 7.5, or you've got to be above 6.3. They're not that specific, but this area, this surplus or the unassigned fund balance, has been one of the areas commented on in past reviews. Mr. Flynn, I think if you remember,
Yep.
in our early years on the Board of Finance, that was one of the first areas commented on.
Yep. So we've had negative comments from the rating agencies on both the general fund balance, which currently sits at a little over 5%, which ranks like 17th out of 18th AAA towns. We've had negative comments and outlook, I believe, on the internal fund balance. And this marginally addresses that issue and improves that issue. We've had an OPEB increase, and OPEB stands for Other Post-Employment Benefits, which is basically retiree health care. And this brings us up to full funding on the ARC on that, right?
Yes.
We've increased the contingency. That contingency is a mix of several items, including within that contingency account, broadly defined, unsettled union contracts and labor issues that need to be budgeted for but are unknown at this time. We have the contracted salary and wages increase due to the settled contracts. We have our experience with workers' comp. We have our experience with the unemployment comp. And then we look at all other expenses, which outside the Board of Education total $24,750,000. And we see that that's actually flat, or actually a little bit down year over year. I just pointed out because our budget drivers are not changing. They're the same year after year after year. We talk a lot about it's a tough budget year, it's a tough budget year, but these drivers aren't going away anytime soon. The retirement drivers, the health insurance drivers, the compensation drivers, and our concerns on our reserves and our insurance. They're not going away. And in fact, we've seen some analysis that says that in the out years, some of them actually get worse. So it's worth noting that essentially they're all tough budget years. And I just wanted to point that out because I think this sheet spells it out pretty well. So I don't know if anybody has a comment on that or not. But, all right, seeing none. Does anybody have any other topics for discussion before we close this off for the night? Open up, Mr. Hiller, do you have anything you'd like to add?
The only other one,
By the way, thank you, and Mrs. Gardner, thank you for putting this together in short order.
As you are aware, the fire contract was passed by the RTM at the last,
Oh, yeah.
well, at the end of February. And we've taken, there's been some time, there's still one pending issue to be decided between the administration and the local union. However, and realize that this is basically a two-year increase. But for the coming year, we are recommending an increase of $561,482 in the fire department budget, and that there be a commensurate decrease in the contingency account.
And are you asking that we make that,
We pass it
transfer
on.
tomorrow
The
night
other
as part of
intent would be that there's another, and it doesn't involve the budgetary process,
yeah,
but in the current fiscal year, in fiscal year 12, we intend to bring to the Board of Selectmen 3 weeks from yesterday, a transfer of funds from this year's contingency account to cover the fiscal 12 shortfall in that account based on the current contract. And so that'll put us even for this year. So really, this is essentially a two-year increase. In rough figures,
do we need to do anything with it tomorrow night? Or are you saying that you're just
no,
giving?
I think just to move it forward to the board of, to the RTM, I think we should do it tomorrow night. And we can pass out the sheets that are
So-
recommended.
So tomorrow night, you're going to ask that within the budget, we reduce the contingency and raise the various salary lines within the fire department?
Correct, and it's essentially, excuse me, totally within the salary lines, with the exception of a minor increase in the Social Security, which relates to the Medicare and life insurance.
So we'll be
Everything else
reducing the
relates to-
contingency and increasing the salary and wage lines
Yes.
in the one department for the settlement of the contract,
I'll pass this out to the board.
which happened after this budget was put before us. Yeah, Mr. Tetro?
The soonest that could get on an RTM agenda, I believe, is for April.
Well, but
That's for 12, not
that's for
for
fiscal
13.
12.
Okay.
And our intent is to bring it
Is
into the,
the adjustment for tomorrow night going to be part of the fiscal year 13 budget?
yes.
Okay, so the fiscal year 12 adjustment would be at some time in the future, not tomorrow night.
The fiscal year 12 wouldn't happen until the May meeting of the Board of Finance, after the Board of Selectmen has had an opportunity to review it at their, I believe it's April 18th meeting.
Very good. Just want to make sure we're doing those things in proper order and they're properly noticed. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Mr. Stone, you have a comment?
Yeah, I know it came up during our discussions earlier about putting another person in on the building department, and I was just wondering if anyone had any comments on that, or any feelings, one way or the other?
I think one of the items, if I might be so bold, one of the items that happened at the Board of Selectmen meeting was they increased the contingency. I think that was, and I don't want to speak for you, sir, but I think Mr. Tetro asked that it be done there so that he and the administration could further evaluate whether they indeed need that position within the building department, as opposed to putting it directly within the building department. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think that I think it's best to make a fully informed decision. I think that, I don't think you can name a department that's not running short of people. And as much as certainly the building department, we talk about it being a revenue generator, I'm not sure adding a person in building is going to make any more development happen in town and any more building permits get generated. That is certainly one of the urgent needs that we have. But there are a number of needs. So basically, and that one position doesn't impact just one department. That has a domino effect into zoning. And we haven't done a full cost analysis in terms of what that takes and what the impact's going to be. So in trying to keep it away from the heat of budget season, we said, let's do two things. Let's put some additional funding into contingency that just allows for the possibility of a new position or part of a new position being put in for the year. But let's also go back and look at the full needs and be clear on what our priorities are before we jump.
Good. Please.
On another topic, I know we've discussed this year after year, and I've had some discussions with Mr. Bolito about the charities. And I was just curious if anyone has discussions on that at this time. I know there's been times when I felt we should eliminate, as a town, giving to charities, although there's some that obviously I feel that we shouldn't, that we still should give to. But, in tough times, I hate to have the taxpayers give to certain charities when the charities can get from individuals. And some of them, when we had discussions, I wasn't even sure if we were mandated to do it, even though we were told we were. So I just want to bring that up.
Sure. Mr. Bolito?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree with Mr. Stone completely. This has been an issue that has bedeviled the board since I've been on it, and when times are tough and you have to try to find whatever savings you can to keep taxes reasonably where they are, I think this is a place to start. Philosophically, I've always had an issue with essentially what amounts to forced charitable contributions. I think that should be up to individual citizens to make their own choice about who they decide to give to. There's also differences in the types of charities. You look at the Pequot Library, which is a quasi-public library, but it's still a private institution. Then you look at some of the other charities, which are all worthwhile, but, you know, should the town be funding them? And I know we had set up a subcommittee to examine this, and I'm hopeful that that will get started again, and we can get down to the issue of, A, should we be making these contributions, and B, if we decide to continue that, what's the process by which different charities get on the list? I know that we've always been uncomfortable with the fact that there's no history about who's on the list, why are they on the list, why isn't some other charity on the list? There's no formal process set up, so I think that all needs to be fleshed out. But for our immediate concern, I intend to make several motions tomorrow night to address the not-for-profits, zero many of them out, not because of any feelings about the worthwhile nature of the charities, but we need to find savings someplace, and I think this is a place to start. So,
Thank you. Any other questions, comments, concerns? Mr. Hiller, you're not letting me go here. You're really...
that should be my
Yeah, I know. Go ahead.
One change that was, and we are able to affect it, that was discussed at the Board of Selectmen meeting, was the, we had previously put in the private agencies, which were just discussed, a figure of $39,000 for the
Yeah.
Fairfield Theater Company. The Board of Selectmen asked that we look at putting that someplace else. We have been able to create two separate lines within Public Works operation for the electricity cost and for the heating costs attributable to that building. And I think that at least partially satisfies some of the concerns that particularly Selectman Walsh had as far as that's
Yep.
concerned. And, that would require a change tomorrow evening within both the private agency account and within public.
Again, it's just a transfer.
Correct.
Yeah. And I thank you and Mrs. Bossy for reaching out to me on that subsequent to the Board of Selectmen meeting. And what they've done is created two different accounts within the DPW department to segregate the amounts specific to the location, but to pull that out of private agencies, so that it's not listed as a private agency, but rightfully listed within those accounts. One other item that I did speak to Ms. Bossy about, and Mrs. Bossy about, and we'll talk to here, is the private agencies. As Mr. Stone, I think, correctly points out, there's always been a little confusion over those that are mandatory and those that are not mandatory. So I had asked or recommended that perhaps we could bifurcate the two. So instead of having one section called private agencies, have two sections, one mandatory private, so that there's no ambiguity, and one that are not listed as mandatory. And that way, we just simplify it a little bit further. And I don't think that's a big deal. I think it's shuffling some papers and adding a tab. You don't need to change account numbers, or department numbers. But I think, Mr. Stone, that might help with the confusion that you alluded to earlier. So, any other questions, comments? You guys just aren't going to let it die. Trying to beat Rob's record.
I know. Oh, that's right. Yeah, that's right. Paul, you said you're going to, so those are the expenses related to the Fairfield, or some of the expenses related to the theater company. Where does the
Those are the-
where does the revenues go into the budget? Because they're supposed to be paying us some percentage of their ticket.
We can also do that as far as putting that, it's included within the revenue line for other town properties. I think it might be appropriate, given.
I think that'd be a
given
great
that we're
idea.
Segregating
Yeah.
the utility costs, that we further segregate that out, and it's not going to have, there's no material impact as far as the budget's concerned, but.
Excellent idea. Thank you. Anybody else?
I've been debating.
You guys are killing me.
We want to stay.
Good job, guys.
Right.
Keep my record intact.
I did hesitate. I've been
Got a
thinking
lot of
about
Girl Scout cookies here to get rid of.
just workers' comp. I mean, that's a major cost driver, budget driver that's been going up year after year. And in that particular major cost driver, in my opinion, it just doesn't have to be. So I look, in other words, I think it can be reversed. So I look forward to seeing the results of the programs that Mr. Tetro put in place
Yeah.
to reverse that particular line item, because it's, it's 27% this year, but it's up, I think when I started on the board, it was at $1 million. It's a major cost driver in the internal service fund, correct? So maybe, and this does have a long tail, and it's not going to happen overnight, but quarterly updates would be great to see how the program's running and if there's been any significant changes in the way we do business. So we're not having the issues of new workman's comp claims.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Seeing none. Do I have a motion? Yes. Mr. Bolito, seconded by Mr. Stone. All in favor? We are adjourned, everybody. Have a good evening. We'll see you tomorrow night, same time.